Shana Tova. Today is the birthday of the world. Today is about what was. Today is about our tomorrows. And today is about what we must do to make our futures better. As we all know, birthdays are times that we reflect on what is good, what is challenging, and what we should be doing to improve. There is no question that we are living in difficult times. So today, the 78th birthday of the world gives us time to take stock of that world, where we are, and what New Year's resolutions we need to make as we look towards the future. How do we do this? Let us think about an everyday item in our life that will help us reflect. How many of you have recently refilled a Metro card? You can raise your hand. I know that many of you might have it automatically refilled. So if you haven't been to a machine in a while, let me show you what your choices are now. You should add value or add time. Add value or add time. This should be a straightforward question. Are we adding time? Meaning, how many swipes in a day for how many days? Or are we adding value? A question of money. But every time I look at a MetroCard machine, I think of something much deeper. In fact, a year ago, I was standing at a MetroCard machine, I saw this come up, and I took a picture of it. I said, that is my Rosh HaShana sermon. What if we had to choose between adding time, which means just adding years, or adding value, which means really having substance? In a recent conversation that I had with members of our community, we had a divided group. On one hand, there was the assertion that of course we want more time. Wouldn't we want to be on this earth as long as possible? Wouldn't we want to make a deal that we could extend our life as many days as we wanted to be here? Yes, that sounds enticing, but what if we were only able to add time without value? What if we knew that we had limited time left, but during that time, we would have beautiful relationships, and we could feel the impact of our lives on the lives of those we love and in the world that we live in? Wouldn't it be great to live a life of value, even if it meant limited time? God willing, there will be many days in front of all of us. And this is what I would like to focus on this morning as we look at our world and our role in it. So let's begin by asking, what's the current landscape? We know that we inhabit a fractured world. It is physically fractured, as we read about climate change and understand that our earth needs fixing, and it's fractured between people. The divisions between people seem louder and stronger than ever before. And of course, it feels like it shouldn't be this way, given our ability to connect with one another. Thomas Friedman, in his new book, Thank You for Being Late, reflected on the irony of his previous book, The World is Flat, written in 2004. When he wrote that book in 2004, he didn't realize how much flattening there was still to go. He writes, "When I looked back at The World is Flat, just to remind myself what I was thinking in '04, I decided to turn to the index. I ran my finger down the page, and there was no Facebook in the F's. That's right. When I was running around in 2004, Friedman says, declaring that the world was flat, Facebook didn't even exist. Twitter was still a sound. The cloud was still in the sky. 4G was a parking space. Applications were what you sent to college. LinkedIn was barely known, and some people thought of it as a prison. And Skype, for most people, was a typo. Today, we have the tools to connect with our world and the people in it, but do we understand what the challenges are? Have we identified what we care about to make this a world of value? And have we demanded of ourselves that we do something about it? Have we reminded ourselves that to be truly human, we must see the sacred in each other? In Yuval Noah Harari's recent book, Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, we get an overview of the world as it was, as it is, and where it is headed. As he wrote, for generation after generation, humans have prayed to every god, angel, and sign, and have invented countless tools, institutions, and social networks. But people have continued to die in the millions from starvation, epidemics, and violence. Many thinkers and prophets concluded that famine, plague, and war must be an integral part of God's cosmic plan and of our own imperfect nature. Nothing short, except the end of time, would rid ourselves from them. But Harari argues, we don't need to pray to any god. We know quite well what needs to be done to prevent famine, plague, and war. And we usually succeed in doing it. And we have made progress, sort of. For the first time in history, more people die today from eating too much rather than too little. More people die from old age rather than infectious disease. And more people commit suicide than being killed by soldiers, terrorists, and criminals combined. He does add, the claim that we are bringing them under control may strike many as outrageous, naive, or callous. What about the billions of people scraping by on less than $2 a day? What about the ongoing AIDS crisis in Africa? Or the wars raging in Syria? The difference now is that these issues are brought on by us. It used to be that a drought would cause famine. But we know now that as famines still strike some areas from time to time, they are the exceptions. If people in Syria, Sudan, and Somalia starve to death, it is because their leaders let them. There is enough food. It is the how it is distributed is the problem. And what people are eating is the problem. In 2010, famine and malnutrition killed 1 million people, yet obesity killed 3 million. In 2014, more than 2.1 billion people were overweight, compared to 850 million people who suffered from malnutrition. Half of humankind is expected to be overweight by 2030. In reading Harari's book, it was as if I was reading a modern-day version of the Unatana Tokef. The plagues upon us begging the question, who will live and who will die? The painful reflection caused me to ask the following 3 questions. As we work to add value, not just time, what challenges do we need to focus on in this world to make it a world worth living in and livable for humanity as we celebrate a new year? Number 2, why is this our role as Jews? And number 3, what do we need to do to make a difference? First, what challenges do we see? There are many issues keeping people up at night. There's no way I can tackle all of them. And they might not all be the same. For some of us, it is issues of security and terrorism. There is no question that the world is a scary place. There are people using their religious and ethnic beliefs to justify murder and hatred across the globe. The killing of innocent people, either by Islamic fundamentalists or those who kill in the name of white supremacy, are horrors in our world, and I cannot believe I am still talking about this in 2017. That I had to give a sermon the Shabbat after Charlottesville with my children sitting in the pews and talk about the rise of anti-Semitism was nothing short of horrifying for me as a mother. For others, the struggle is Israel. Though almost 70 years old and strong, Israel is having its challenges. It is so often delegitimized on the world stage. Certainly at the United Nations, that's causing us a lot of traffic. And the ability and pride of supporting Israel on college campus is getting harder and harder. We cannot remain silent as the Jewish state is constantly singled out. I was proud to be part of a delegation in July with the New York Board of Rabbis when we sat top above the UN with the new UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in his office. We discussed a range of issues ranging from anti-Semitism and Zionism to voting tendencies at the UN and the hostile behavior between the UN agencies such as UNESCO. With reference to the state of Israel, the Secretary General said, "It is not my role to tell the member states what to do, but I am very clear to insist that the state of Israel has a right to exist, to have secure borders, and must be treated like every other state." Further, we must support our students on college campuses, their Hillels. We must speak to their elected officials and not allow Israel to be held to a different standard than the rest of the world. We must continue to believe in a peaceful outcome to the Israeli-Palestinian process. I was recently speaking with J.J. Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Forward, a journalist who will be speaking from this bima on October 24th. And he commented that while many Israelis on all sides are ambivalent about whether a two-state solution would actually be safe for Israel, it is Israel's generals and security detail that are the most convinced that the only way for Israel to be safe is if there are two states. The third challenge is immigration and refugees. As the Jewish Council of Public Affairs recently reminded Jewish leaders, closing our nation's doors to immigrants and refugees would contradict the fundamental Jewish belief of welcoming the stranger. The United States has one of the most stringent vetting policies in the world. Now, of course, our immigration policy must balance national security concerns with the concern and protection of civil and human rights. But the American immigrant experience is one of our country's greatest sources of strength. Newcomers are essential to the fabric of our society, enriching our culture and contributing all around. The Social Action Committee of Sutton Place Synagogue will be bringing Mark Hetfield, the CEO of HIAS, in December to SPS to speak about the role the Jewish community can play as we grapple with this sensitive issue. I hope you will all be there. A final issue is that of climate change. In the recently published National Climate Report, it is clear that the Earth is getting hotter and wetter, and we are the ones to blame. It is clear from our Torah that just as we have a religious understanding of why the world came into being, we also have an equal obligation to discuss how we ensure its permanence. Regardless of which of these challenges you find compelling, we must get involved. As Elie Wiesel so eloquently said, take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. We must speak out when we see problems in our midst, even if it is difficult. I am reminded of what Alan Paton wrote in his book, Ah, the Land is Beautiful. He wrote, when I go up to heaven, which is my intention, the big judge will say to me, where are your wounds? And if I say, I haven't any, he will say, was there nothing worth fighting for? This brings us to the second question. Why do we need to get involved? Is there really a religious imperative? Yes, there is. On Rosh HaShana, if we are going to add value, not just time, to the world, we need to realize that it starts with our deep connections between members of humanity. As Mishnah Sanhedrin taught, why does the creation story refer to Adam, a singular person? To teach us that he who saves a life saves the world, but he who destroys a life destroys the world. Now that we recognize the importance of each person, we need to translate that into action. Otherwise, talking about God on these holidays is meaningless. As George Yancey wrote earlier this year, is your God dead? Have you buried God in the majestic cathedrals, the ornamental tombs of your churches and synagogues and mosques? As Rabbi Heschel said, any God who is mine but not yours, any God who is concerned with me but not you, is an idol. Of course, we need to embrace connections between religions in order to address the problems we have. We can't sit in our own corners speaking to ourselves. We need to reach out across faith communities to make changes. One of the most powerful books that I recently read was Threading My Prayer Rug. I'd like to thank Susan Goodman for giving me a copy of that book, by Sabiha Rahman. This book, a memoir about a woman's journey from her being a Pakistani Muslim to an American Muslim, tackles a number of issues about what kind of world we can build together. She writes, "I too have a dream. As America continues to learn and grow in the direction of pluralism, so will we. We will continue to build a country meant for all faiths, to create spaces that enhance the dialogue and champion fellowship. Together, we will change the discourse, quell violence with knowledge, and banish phobias to the fringes as we work together in unity of spirit, one nation under God." And so we come to the 4 concepts in Judaism that should inspire us to action in 5778 as we add value to the world. Number 1, our first value is B'Tselem Elohim. We are all created in God's image. The color of our skin, the content of our pocketbook, our language of origin should not be used to divide us, but the sanctity that all of us are created in the image of God should be used to unite us. The second value is Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. As Jews, we have a responsibility to speak out for one another. We must stand up for Israel in the papers, at the UN, on college campuses. We must fight and call out anti-Semitism from the left and the right. We must see that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and we cannot be silent when that is taking place. Number 3, every day we conclude our prayers with the Aleinu. We say, L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai. We must repair the world for the kingship of heaven. Our third value is to remind ourselves that we have an obligation to make this world better. Just adding a year isn't the Jewish thing to do. Our mission, our obligation, is to make it a year worth living. And the fourth value is that we must live up to the biblical mandate that I mentioned earlier. The most often repeated mitzvah in our Torah, we shall welcome the stranger, for we were strangers. And this is not just about immigration. It is how we welcome new people to this synagogue. It is how we welcome those who have converted, chosen to be a part of our Jewish community. It is how we welcome people into our homes. We can't wait outside. We need to stand up. We need to go to the door. We need to welcome people in. We can no longer be gatekeepers. We need to be hosts, or appropriate for this morning, ushers. So now that we know what the challenges are and why Judaism compels us to do something, we need to ask ourselves, how can we make a difference? Thomas Friedman reminds us that we must pause and think. In such a time, opting to pause and reflect rather than panic or withdraw is a necessity. It is not a luxury or a distraction. It is a way to increase the odds that we will better understand and engage productively with the world that we live in. For when you press the pause button on a machine, it stops. But when you press the pause button on human beings, they start. You start to reflect. You start to rethink your assumptions. You start to reimagine what is possible. And most importantly, you start to reconnect with your deeply held beliefs. Once you have done that, you can imagine a better path. For us on these holidays, it means hearing the small, still voice. It won't always happen with thunder and with lightning, or flashes in front of us, or with loud music. It will be taking the time to pause and reflect on what must get done. Pausing now will help us make sense for our new year. As Ann Dillard wrote, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. The high holidays are a time when we think about our own identity and our relationships with one another. Over the next 10 days, we must explore who we are. Tomorrow, we will contemplate how we locate our spiritual address. And when we come back together for Yom Kippur, we will contemplate our dreams for Israel and how, even in the most difficult of times, do we find the resilience to persevere after loss. In Rabbi Naomi Levy's book, and by the way, she'll be speaking here in May, Einstein and the Rabbi, she teaches, what do you bring to work? Ego or soul? What would it look like to wake up each morning and believe that you are charged with a holy mission? You can view your work as toil. You can keep people in line by intimidating them. Or you can bring your soul to work and understand that the good Lord has sent you here to help and heal some corner of the world. The choice is ours. Do you want to get the job done, or do you have a vision for the future and understand that you must plant seeds and be patient? Today, we are beginning to plant seeds for a better world. We are adding value and time. It is clear, though, that ours is not the first generation to grapple with how to care from the world. For if we look back to Kohelet Rabbah, we read, in the hour when God created the first person, he showed him the trees in the Garden of Eden and said to him, see my works? See how fine they are? Now all that I have created for your benefit. Think upon this. Do not corrupt and destroy my world. For if you destroy it, there is no one to restore it after you. This midrash reminds us that we must add time and value because we are responsible for our earth and its inhabitants. Our world has been created. It is here for us to enjoy, but it is also here for us to take care of. This is our sacred task. The choice is ours. This year, add value to our time. Shana Tova.